Have you ever looked at a pine cone or a piece of driftwood and wondered, what can I turn that into? Well, while you stepped over that forgotten scrap of wood, Nathan Chappell picked it up and turned it into something memorable.
I got involved in wood turning during COVID, which, was the time when I think a lot of us found our passions in life and our hobbies. And I had always loved woodworking. I was a kid in junior high that stayed late after school to make a schoolhouse clock and things like that. But it wasn't until COVID that I took a class and decided, I got a little bit of time. I'm not traveling as much. I fell in love with it. Ended up converting my entire garage into a wood turning labyrinth of 3 different lathes, and just got really interested in different types of wood and things like that. So it's been a lot of fun, and I say that's cheaper than therapy, but it's actually not. It's a lot more than therapy would be, but it has the same calming effect on me.
Wood turning is basically when you spin a piece of wood really fast on a machine and use tools to carve it into cool shapes like bowls or pens. Think of it like pottery.
It's almost the opposite of pottery.
Okay, well, maybe it's nothing like pottery. The point is, watch out for splinters.
You've got to be laser focused on, otherwise, a piece of wood spinning several thousand RPMs, bad things happen. Instead of adding clay to build something up, you're essentially removing wood to turn it down. When you see a wood bowl, it's essentially, it comes from a giant piece of wood that is turned down. It's called turned down, which means that you're essentially carving it into that shape of a bowl. There's treatments that you have to do to it. If the wood is rotten or it's light, you have to stabilize it. And there's certain ways that you bake it and add resin to it and things like that. But you can turn driftwood. I've picked up driftwood from a beach up in Santa Barbara and made pens out of driftwood. Yeah, so I'm not into wood turning to make money and to do something at scale. I love turning small things like bottle stoppers for wine bottles, or a handle for a pizza cutter, or pens. I've made about 1,000 pens. And none of these are really to sell, but they're basically made out of love to give to people that mean something to me.
Nathan collects a piece of wood from each location when he travels, including Baird's Tavern, which has a small role in American history. For him, it's a departure from his less tangible work in the AI space, getting hands-on in a multi-sensory medium.
And so I'll be anywhere. I was in Geneva last year. I probably smuggled wood home from every country I've traveled over the last couple of years. I always have this, I've bated breath. I'm am I going to get through security this time? Or are they going to x-ray and see this weird shape of, I took a bag of pine cones home from, I think, Geneva last year. And I was oh, I'm sure going to get stopped. And I'm sure it's probably not legal just because of whatever. I'll find out one of these days, but so far so good. I've been in the clear. I was with a CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company. It was several years ago, but it really stuck out to me as I was asking her, what do you do to relax? And she's like, I mow the grass. She goes, because there's few things in life. She's like, one, it's quick, and it doesn't take all day, but it's I can spend an hour, but also at the end, I can see the immediate impact of what I did. It was long and now it's short, and it looked messy and now it looks nice. And so, very similarly, and that's why I like to do small wood projects where pens and bottle stoppers and handles, and because it takes an hour. It uses all of your senses. I would say it's super easy. Everyone needs a hobby, and if they're intimidated because it seems complicated, it's not. It's super easy, and even with some minor, very inexpensive tools, you could start turning something. And so anyone's in the Nashville area and wants to learn how to make a pen, I've brought people in my garage so many times, and literally you walk in, don't have a clue, and you walk out, you're I could totally do this. And so, people can look me up and we can connect on all things wood turning. It's just always fun to see the delight when I send it to somebody and I'm hey, this is from our time at Baird's Tavern. And they're just oh my gosh, that's so cool. And so it's one of those gifts that, it's just, I get more joy out of it than the person receiving it, I'm sure.
This is the Ready Tesco podcast, brought to you by Applause. I'm David Carty. Today's guest is wood turner and nonprofit AI enthusiast, Nathan Chappell. Nathan is a pioneer at the crossroads of artificial intelligence and generosity. As Senior Vice President of DonorSearch AI, he's leading the charge in how nonprofits leverage AI to drive social good. He's also the founder of Fundraising AI, a community focused on ethical AI use in fundraising. He's co-authored books like The Generosity Crisis and, more recently, Nonprofit AI, a comprehensive guide to implementing artificial intelligence for social good. His insights have been featured everywhere, from Forbes to NPR, and his own podcast, Fundraising AI, which strives to be a resource for leaders in the nonprofit tech world. We often talk about AI in the context of for-profit businesses, but what about the nonprofit sector? How are these mission-driven organizations using AI with both purpose and efficiency? What can we learn from their approach, especially when it comes to building systems that aim for high ethical and accountability standards? Nathan's here to share some practical advice and get to the root of how organizations can build better AI systems. Get it? Root because of trees and wood? Yeah, here's Nathan. Nathan, on this podcast, we largely speak with experts in the for-profit sector, but can you give us a high-level glimpse of how AI is being used by nonprofit organizations? And what are some of the key takeaways from a software quality and implementation standpoint?
Yeah, so the nonprofit and the for-profit sector are not all that different in some senses, and very different in another sense, in terms of how they operate in essentially the currency of trust. Not different in the fact that they have lots of data, or frankly too much data, and they need to make clear insights out of that data. And so back in 2017, I started building machine learning models that were predicting which patients in a hospital were likely to make a charitable gift. And it's very much the similar type of use case that a for-profit would have, which would be like, you have all the customers in the world, which are most likely going to upgrade their cell phone or buy a new phone or whatever it might be. In a hospital setting, only 2% of patients ever make a gift to a hospital, but average hospital has 2 million patient visits a year. So it's this needle in a haystack. So, there's about 1.7 million nonprofits in the country. Many of them have far too many constituents or potential donors that they could ever imagine, but not every person is a potential donor, and so less than half of Americans give to charity at all. Of those, the ones that are going to give to your nonprofit, the number gets very narrow. So from a very clear use case, so building custom AI ML applications to predict who's likely to do this thing, and then from there understanding who's when and how much and for what purpose. I think the main difference between the for-profit and the nonprofit world is that the issue of trust is at the foreground. Now, most for-profit entities, they don't talk about themselves not being trustworthy. I mean, they all have responsible AI frameworks, but the stakes are very low if you're, messing up predictions on who's going to buy the next pair of Nike shoes, versus the nonprofit sector, very large, say if a very large, say Red Cross, we'll just use an example, a household name, builds an algorithm that is racist and is, ageist and all the other things and all the other ists, it won't only affect a Red Cross, it will affect all the other nonprofits that are similar to Red Cross. And so the stakes are very high, and the prioritization on responsible AI is really probably the main distinction. But the use cases are not that different.
You just mentioned a lot of the organizations in the nonprofit sector. There's obviously a lot of options out there, but I want to be respectful for your passion in this space. What are some particular examples or causes in the nonprofit sector that you're encouraged by?
Yeah, so it started out, of course, when we're talking about predictive AI, it started out with larger types of organizations because, predictive AI was not nearly as affordable or accessible as it is today, but also not as affordable or accessible as generative AI. And so, when I think about the early adopters in the sector, they tended to be fairly large, like hospitals, universities, large membership organizations trying to predict, who's likely to, take this action. And that's where a lot of the early AI/ML was. It was at the enterprise level because it's very expensive. We also, realized that the data that nonprofits had on their own wasn't sufficient. And so we had to go outside to source enhance data. And so started purchasing lots and lots of data to enhance those models to then, essentially round out their models and help them perform at a higher level. The big transition, though, has been since, November 30th, 2022, when GPT came out. That was an important date because that made every, especially small nonprofit, it gave them wings. It allowed them to level up in ways that were never before imaginable. And so fast forward from, November 2022 to today, I think we see some of the most interesting innovative use cases of AI around small nonprofits that don't have a lot of, deep experience, but they're curious. And after doing this for the last 7 or 8 years and seeing successes and failures in AI, I'm absolutely more convinced than ever that curiosity actually holds the key to whether or not you'll be successful or not in AI. It has a lot less to do with models and data and a lot more to do with asking the questions, what if?
Yeah, that experimental sort of mindset, absolutely. Nonprofits tend to be very mission driven. In what ways does that clarity of purpose lead to better AI product decisions? And maybe how can for profit teams translate that into stronger alignment between business goals and technical quality?
Yeah, I think nonprofits also suffer from mission drift as well, and so some do, some don't, right? And so, yeah, they should all be mission focused. And at its core, the intention of every nonprofit is essentially exist to put itself out of business. And so the idea for a nonprofit is that you exist to solve a problem. And if you're so good at solving that problem, essentially that problem, wouldn't exist. And then therefore you'd put yourself out of business. I happened to work early on where I started my AI/ML career was at a cancer hospital. Now, what's interesting about it is that the cancer hospital was originally a tuberculosis hospital over 100 years ago. It was on the West Coast where it was this dry desert, and it became very well known all over the country as like a movement. So people in New York, in Boston, and very cold and damp places where tuberculosis was rampant would put their beloved, family members and friends on a train, send them out west to dry out in this desert. And it was actually, there's stories, a book written, Two Tenths in a Desert, and it was literally a nurse, and they would just care for these people, and they'd get better, and so when tuberculosis essentially was cured, so City of Hope is the name of it. City of Hope is now one of the top cancer hospitals in the country. Started out as a tuberculosis hospital, essentially put itself out of business, and it found a new mission. And it found a new mission because one of the nurses at the tuberculosis hospital got cancer. And they were like, you know what? Tuberculosis is cured. Like, let's reinvent ourselves. So there is an ethos, hopefully, ideally, with most nonprofits. It's like, we don't want to, be focused on these issues forever. Like, we want to make a significant difference. So that mission driven aspect does provide some laser focus. But it's easy also to get, to do too many things and to try to, solve all the problems. And we see some nonprofits, struggling with that as well. So I think the application, though, is for those that I think are successful, do have kind of a maniacal focus on what they're trying to solve. And, instead of boiling the ocean, they're like, what, here's the problem. Let's put everything at this problem and continue to support it. Lots of applications in AI there, though, too, because, one of the biggest challenges, I think, when you have especially generative AI, it's a tool that knows something about everything and can do almost anything. And it's very easy to lose focus and, have this like opportunity overwhelm, which I have personally as an entrepreneur. But I have to remind myself, of like, okay, what is the problem I'm trying to achieve? And then what are the best tools to help me solve that problem? And then stay focused on that and then peel back the onion.
Right. Stay dialed in. There will always be more problems to solve, right? You
For
can
sure.
solve the other ones later on. You provide a lot of educational material and resources in your book. There seems to be an overall lack of AI fluency in the marketplace, even as businesses plunge themselves into the technology. How important is it to continue to educate and upskill in AI? And how would you recommend that teams and organizations do that?
The truth of the shift, this truly tectonic shift that we're going through as a society, as a humanity, I think is grossly underestimated by most people. I think, they're like, well, humans are adaptable. There's always been new technology and we figured out crypto, didn't we? And or the internet, and similarly, like, AI like the internet, except that it actually gets better and self-improves, or like electricity, is in everything but self-improves. So there is, in fact, no technology that humans have ever encountered that self-improves. So this, and not in an incremental way, but in an exponential way. So it's not AI. The limitations of AI are not based on, the number of, 26-year-old kids in Silicon Valley wearing hoodies. AI is training AI. And that is something that I think most people really fail to understand, the exponential nature. And we talk about exponentials as these like just loose terms, like, oh, it's this exponential technology, and don't realize that if you fold a piece of paper in half 42 times, it will reach from Earth to the moon. So exponentials are real. Like they are not incremental by any stretch. And so what that means is that there's winners and losers. And, as people that are looking at, what is my future in my job, and what do I need to do to prepare, those that, now AI will replace some positions, but it's going to change almost every position. I think those that lean in and really um, increase their AI fluency by reading blogs every day, or reading books, or talking to friends and neighbors about how are you using this, and incentivizing curiosity within the workplace, I think are really going to stand the test of time. Those that put their head in the sand, that pretend that this is a fad and it's going to go away, or it's not exponential, are going to have a really hard time keeping up, because every use case, and Procter and Gamble with Harvard Business School just did the study a few weeks ago, with like 777 or 770 workers at Procter and Gamble, and the net effect of people using AI essentially performed almost as equally as teams of people, that were not using AI. But, essentially in every use case, they're doing their work better, they're doing it faster, and at the end of the day, they're having stronger emotional benefits. So they're end up being happier. And so it's going to be really hard to compete in the future if you don't increase your AI fluency, because you'll be competing against people that are doing their work better and faster, and in the end, being happier because they did their work better and faster.
Yeah, it's a seismic shift.
Yeah.
Nonprofits often work with limited resources, but they have to build AI systems that are accurate and deeply aligned with human outcomes. You mentioned the potential problematic element of the ethical outcomes if it's not aligned on that level as well. What can for-profit organizations learn from this kind of deliberate, high-quality AI implementation?
Yeah, I think, on the for-profit side, every organization, I worry much more about the organizations that are using AI without thinking about, what they're trying to achieve, and what the long-term consequences might be, or the unintended consequences. And so, so many are moving and rushing into AI because, it truly is an arms race right now in terms of who has, better models faster, but not necessarily safer models. Now, in absence of any regulation in the US at least, so in the UK, there's some AI regulation that is still light, in my opinion, but in absence of any regulation, it's incumbent on any organization that is using AI to essentially establish, um, one is to ensure that the use of the AI is aligned with their corporate values. So, go back and look at your corporate values, and actually, understand that they make a difference. And they should be pointed at what type of AI you should use, and what AI you should not use, and how you should use that. To be prepared to say no. We're in a new world where just because you can doesn't mean you should. That technology will continue to present itself even faster and faster with things that seem impossible, or were impossible, that can do these amazing things, but may not be beneficial in the long term. So I think every for-profit, and every nonprofit, like, this is where we're in it together. Like, it doesn't nothing, AI doesn't help us if we all destroy humanity in the future by just doing things irresponsibly. So I think going first and prioritizing, looking at your corporate values and aligning your AI governance with those corporate values is, it has to be your top priority. And then when you're presented with a new type of technology that shows that it can deliver really strong short-term results, but maybe in the long term it actually could actually have unintended consequences on society, or even in your revenue stream, be prepared to say no. And so that AI governance policy is the only way I know of that allows you to give you that checkpoint to say, okay, like this appears to be good short term. Is it good long term? If the answer is yes to both, then we move forward. If it's not, and then the last part of that is that AI, as it's a dynamic technology, this exponential technology, also changes. Therefore, your AI policy, your AI governance also needs to change. It needs to be reviewed not once every 10 years, like that normally happens in like data governance, but like literally every 6 months. If you developed a policy last year, it probably didn't talk about agentic AI. But now 2025 is the year that's all people are talking about, right? And so ensuring that your AI governance and your organization is staying up with advances in technology means that you have to have people around the table that are wrestle with these, what used to be philosophical questions that are now very practical questions.
Right. And empowering everybody up and down the chain to raise a red flag if
Mhm.
one needs to be raised, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How have you seen small, resourceful teams deliver better AI outcomes than maybe larger, more well funded ones? Are there any habits or practices that stand out that maybe some for profit organizations can take to heart?
Yeah, I think it's fascinating the net effect of AI. Of course, it was the big companies that invested; they had the money to invest, and I mean, and they were spending stupid money early on. Like even the J.P. Morgans, Morgan Stanleys, RBC were spending this crazy money to build their own LLMs and to win that arms race. But truly, necessity is a mother of innovation. Smaller organizations, you're like a small mom and pop like corporation to like even midsize, to be honest, I think have this distinct advantage today is that the nimbleness and the clarity of like what you can do to actually enact change is actually really an advantage when you have this technology that's completely democratized. So big corporations are spending so much money and time on just trying to turn a Titanic, right? Or not the Titanic, probably not a good example, but turn a carrier ship or whatever, an aircraft carrier. Super hard to do and super slow, right? I mean, and there's in those like hesitancies and all these kind of things where small and mid-sized companies I see have this like great advantage because they have a thirst and to do something different. They don't have all the bureaucracy of like the things that, well, we tried that before and it doesn't work, so we just don't try. But truly, going back, this is now me thinking back on the last, 7 years on this AI journey and seeing a lot of organizations succeed and a lot of them fail. The key difference is the organizations that reward questions more than answers are the ones that thrive in a world where AI is completely accessible and available and affordable. Those that incentivize like asking their people to ask what if just continuously, so train your team to color outside the line and to think out of the box, and all the things that we used to talk about that weren't really practical are now entirely practical because I can go to generative AI and be like, give me 101 ideas of this stupid thing that I've been stuck on, and it will probably give you a dozen decent ones. And so it's just a new game with new rules.
Yeah, it's like you're reading my ChatGPT history with that suggestion. And also, I hope that the turning the Titanic thing wasn't a Freudian slip. I think you're more optimistic.
No, it's not.
Yeah, I
Let's hope not. It might be for some, but probably not for the most.
sure. No, you sound more optimistic about AI outcomes
I
than
am.
that. Yes. So transparency and accountability, these are often talked about in the context of responsible AI, ethical AI, but these are notoriously difficult to operationalize, right? Are there any practical steps that organizations can take to build AI systems that people can trust and understand?
Yeah, I mean, there certainly are. So, first is, I think, recognizing, yes, so ethical AI is essentially a minimum expectation. I think people put that out there, and especially large corporations of like, well, our AI is ethical. The reality is, well, ethics according to whom, right? To your point, it's like very difficult and subjective. But second, that, responsible AI is not the same thing as beneficial AI. And so this just saying something's ethical doesn't mean that it actually is avoiding long-term consequences. Like social media, for example, is not unethical as a technology. I mean, in fact, by all intentions, it was created to bring people together. It was actually designed to essentially connect people that wouldn't know each other otherwise, and really, ideally, bring us closer together. But of course, the net effect and how it's been abused essentially has been quite the opposite. So increases in anxiety and depression and teen suicide and all those net effects of too much, right? And so, while social media is not unethical, it's also not beneficial to the long term of humanity. And so, I think that's something that organizations, every but for profit, nonprofit, every organization that is selling a product or a service or whatever needs to really wrestle with again. Ensure that your AI is not unintentionally creating bias, right? And we don't even talk about bias anymore. That was such a big topic several years ago. But we got really good in predictive AI at understanding how models are making decisions. So now what used to not be transparent is now totally transparent. I'm a huge advocate. I mean, I have a few patents on AI/ML that in the time in 2018 felt like the right thing to do. It's like, oh, you're going to protect your IP and get these patents on AI, and then realize like, well, by all intents and purposes, that means that my AI is in a black box, and I wouldn't show anyone that black box because essentially that would infringe upon the IP. I've become a huge believer in transparent AI, which means that AI can be interrogated. So predictive AI allows you to interrogate it, which means like if I'm going to make a prediction that you're going to buy a cell phone, you would get a score and the likelihood of you buying that cell phone. I should be able to tell you like what math was used for you specifically that led you to a score of 80 that you're likely to buy a cell phone. And predictive AI now compared to even 7 years ago allows you to do that like completely. Like there is no reason why you can't actually interrogate predictive AI. Generative AI, on the other hand, very, very different. Generative is kind of this like a crazy black labyrinth. Like, in fact, OpenAI and Anthropic and Perplexity, there's not a lot of clarity even from those organizations why those models work as well as they do. So bias is like being mitigated on one hand, but also because we're putting a lot of trust in organizations that they can bias a model intentionally toward a certain way. And we've got to be very mindful of that.
Absolutely. Agentic AI, you mentioned it before, it has the potential to amplify positive impacts and unintended harms. So, what strategies can organizations use to help ensure that these systems act in alignment with their mission? And how can they detect and correct behavior that strays from those intended goals?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the things that keeps me up at night. I mean, I love philosophical questions, but these are now again philosophical questions that are no longer philosophical. Like we've thought about, and we've watched all the sci-fi movies, and we know how they end, and it's all the things. And when we think about agentic, I think there's two parts that I think are independently important, but also collectively like imperative. So on one side, agentic models that essentially models that take action, right? They take autonomous action. So you give them a target, and that target is to achieve something, convince this person to buy this product, or I mean, some of the innocuous things of just like plan a vacation for me or whatever. I don't those whatever those are fine. You can choose to do that or not, but the ones where you're basically saying like convince this person to take action on this thing. Now a model that has read every book on human psychology and consumer behavior, and does not know the difference between manipulating and and whatever else, persuading, right? It literally will take the most expedient path to getting the person to do that thing in whatever way, conniving or authentic. um, Organizations really need to pay attention to that, because a model won't know the difference between manipulating and sharing, right? And so taking a human, of always a human in the loop approach to agentic AI to make sure that that model is representing, again, the corporate values, the values of the organization, because I don't think anyone wants to end up in the paper saying, hey, AT&T just manipulated, 28 million people to buy a new cell phone, right? But a model won't know the difference. It needs a human in the loop. The second part of agentic that I think becomes more complicated is around the bot that takes the form of a human. And so the agentic behind a screen and a one-dimensional cursor where you're just like, using it to like predict something or plan your vacation seems, fairly, like, I don't know, straightforward to an extent. But um, an agent that takes the form of a human is an entirely different question. And it's one that I wrestle with a lot. Like now, if I want a career coach or someone to help me rehearse for an interview or something, that could be very helpful. Or I want to, a bot because it looks like a human, like help me quit smoking. I don't smoke, but like quit smoking. And bots are 87% more likely to help you to convince you to take their point of view than a human. So they're really, really good at this kind of stuff. But portraying itself as a human, well, what kind of human, right? And so in sales, not surprising when we see a lot of agentic bots, they're very attractive women, and in fundraising too. And there's a model that's doing this now, and not surprisingly, so the bias in there obviously is that people respond more of, more. So it's impossible to remove that form of bias. And so we're, instead of perpetuating bias, we have to really be mindful about all those things. And so I don't have all the answers for you. All the main answer, one is make sure that it aligns with your values, both short term and long term. Second is always have a human in the loop. I mean, it's way too early to trust agentic model that it's going to continue to do its intended purpose without defining your values and making sure that there's proper disclosures and things like that at a minimum expectation. But I don't know. It'd be great to have this conversation again in a year from now. And 2 years from now, it'd be like a whole different world.
Well, hopefully, we influence some caution in this space, right?
Absolutely.
That said, if you could wave a magic wand and have all nonprofit and for profit organizations follow a singular ethics framework, what would be essential to include in that framework? What kinds of problems would that help us avoid?
Yeah, so I mean, we created an open source framework a few years ago, and it was crazy. I mean, I remember because it almost killed me. I mean, I pulled together a collection of people from around the world to do this. We had 1,700 emails back and forth to create this framework, and we were looking at what was existing from government agencies and regulatory bodies and things like that. All to say is that they're all about 90% the same. That, privacy, security, explainability, ethics, all of those things that go into it. And there's a ton. I mean, you can just grab one. In fact, ours, at fundraising.ai, it's so generic it could be used for any for-profit or nonprofit. But it goes in two steps further. Being that it's focused on nonprofit, it focuses on environmental sustainability. So that may not be important for some organizations, but in the nonprofit sector, it felt important because if we're doing good to humanity, we also have to be conscious that AI has an environmental impact. And it also means as consumers, we have agency, and we should make it known that, we should look at sourcing clean energy for AI systems. That may not be true for a lot of organizations. They may not care about that. But if they do, I think, we've created 10 tenets, basically 10 pillars for responsible AI, which include all those things. And again, they're free. They're totally open source, fundraising.ai. Literally, and we've seen so many organizations do this. They just go on there and copy it off the website. go into GPT and say, okay, here are 10 tenants that we agree to, or maybe you only like 8 of them, like we like these 8. Next to it, put their corporate values and say, these are our corporate values. Can you build me an AI governance policy that mirrors our corporate values within these 8 things, or these 8 principles that we like? And instead of this taking like weeks and months to do, I mean, literally, like you're like, okay, 2 hours later, like here we go, like we're good, So, and then last, as I already shared, is building in a mechanism where that is reviewed every, and we update ours every 6 months, because I mean, again, like this technology just changes and advances so quickly. So you just have to have this kind of routine behavior that is continuing to look at, like, oh, what's the new thing that we need to add to this or address?
Lightning round questions for you here, Nathan. First one, what is your definition of digital quality?
Digital quality, data quality, for me represents data that is essentially tested, that it is aligned with the type of data that your organization would expect to use and see, and that has relative strong parameters around data hygiene around it, and continuous process for checking the quality of the data.
What is one digital quality trend that you find promising?
I'm actually a little bullish right now on the opportunity for synthetic data. So this probably is kind of a curveball for you. But I think there's some technical breakthroughs in synthetic data that are letting us round out some big gaps and holes in data right now, and allowing us to do that in a pretty transparent way.
Fascinating. What's your favorite app to use in your downtime?
Oh my gosh. I use probably ChatGPT. I use almost continuously, whether I'm in a museum and I'm curious about, a piece of history, or if I'm in a garden and I need to identify a plant. I mean, that has to be my number one used app. But my new favorite pet toy app right now is free. It's called Typo, Typpo, and it's on the phone. And it takes an annoying voice memo and it turns it into a video with your subtitles. And I think it's so much fun to just send people these like custom little videos that once annoyed people, but now actually people look forward to watching and seeing.
Oh, that's interesting. And finally, Nathan, what is something that you're hopeful for?
I am hopeful. I remain a hopeful pessimist. I think is my persona, is that, I worry about a lot of things in the future, but I wake up every morning knowing that, good people wake up alongside me and want to make a difference in the world. So I'm truly hopeful that AI can essentially help bring people together. I think once we really set parameters around how to use it well, that it can be used to bring people in closer community and connection. And in fact, I think it's the only scalable way to reverse declines in generosity. So I remain entirely optimistic that AI holds the key to a more generous future.
They're almost opposite sides of the same coin, right? Or it's like the comedy and tragedy paradigm in a way, right?
Well, I wrote a book called The Generosity Crisis. So by definition, I don't get invited to a lot of dinner parties. But in that book, the conclusion was this idea of radical connection. It's really the way, the way to move forward in society is not to just ask more people for more money. It's to, be boots on the ground and bring people together. And I think AI, while people think it's this dichotomous relationship, it actually is. It can be used and pointed to ways that enhance trust and quality of relationships if it's done well.
Well, Nathan, your dinner party invite is forthcoming. And until then, we really appreciate you joining us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you to Nathan Chappell for joining us. Check out his book, Nonprofit AI, a comprehensive guide to implementing artificial intelligence for social good. You can find a link to it in our podcast notes. Thanks to our producers, Joe Stella and Sam Susala, editor Ian Lippincott, and graphic designer Carly Searles. Subscribe to the Ready, Test, Go podcast on most podcast players or on YouTube, and you can let us know what you think about the podcast by emailing at podcasts@applause.com. Thank you for joining us.